Hi, I'm Kris Oldland, Editor-in-Chief of Field Service News, and welcome to this video presentation which is exclusively brought to you by Field Service News in partnership with Astea. Myself and John Hunt, Managing Director for EMEA of Astea, sat down and talked through the big discussion of how service leaders are adapting to the changing world of field service. Our world and our sector are very much changing, driven partly by the increasing innovation in technology, but also in a shift in service-centric thinking. Manufacturers and companies beyond the manufacturing sector are adopting advanced services. We're seeing more and more talk around servitization. Our world is absolutely in flux at the moment, and some of these changes are seismic. This means we need to be rethinking some of the key performance indicators as we move away from the traditional break-fix model and the service level agreements, more towards things like guarantees of uptime. And also don't forget that today's consumer, today's customer is perhaps more demanding than ever before. So we're seeing a shift towards customer-centric, customer experience-focused KPIs. It's not just the technology, it's not just the thinking and the strategy that's changing in field service, of course. We are witnessing a huge seismic shift from the retiring baby boomer workforce and the incoming millennial workforce. So John and I will be discussing what the next generation workforces bring to the table, what are the differences, and how we should look at these differences and factor those in our new landscape of field service. What are the key requirements for the new field service engineers of today and of course tomorrow? So let's dive straight into the presentation. Okay, John, well, thanks for joining me today. So what we're going to be talking about today is how field service leaders are adapting to what's a very rapidly changing and seeing some huge seismic changes in the world of field service. There are four areas I want to kind of dig into, which will go across each of these, across the presentation, if I may, including how much that world is changing. I'd like to focus on KPIs because I think that's a real driver there. The workforce is changing. I think we need to kind of address that. We need to understand the differences in the shift in workforce, not just in the shift from boomer to millennial, but also things like contingent workforce, the gig economy.
Agreed.
And to touch on the millennials as well, the changing face of the engineer and how we view what the engineer should be. And that kind of fits into all of these areas and how the world's changing, the KPIs, the shifts in generational workforces. But let's dive into the first one.
Sure.
So how much would you say the field service world is changing? I mean, last time we sat here and had a conversation, we discussed just how there is a significant shift in the way manufacturers, particularly forward-looking manufacturers, are viewing service. And it's quite seismic, some of these changes to the approach to service delivery. I want to just recap on that briefly, if I may. Just how significant is the change that we're facing in terms of the changing is, I mean, we hear talks about the fourth paradigm, you know. How important is it that companies understand the size and magnitude of these changes that we're currently seeing in terms of service delivery?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for coming today. Great to see you as always,
pleasure.
Kris. Yeah, so I mean, the changes that we're seeing, they're substantive and palpable. We're seeing it in our new business pipeline and hearing it firsthand from some of the world's leading manufacturers, to name one sector, about how their revenue model is flipped on its head from where it was as little as a few years ago. What we're, again, to use that manufacturing example, what we're industrial equipment manufacturers driving most of their top and bottom line revenue from capital investments from their customers. Yeah. They're transforming that increasingly into an OpEx-driven business. So in that example, they're enabling their customers to essentially subscribe to their equipment, predicated on drivers such as units yielded from the equipment itself and uptime. And along with that, what was previously a services organization cost center, run with a deeply entrenched, homegrown systems in a lot of cases, with custom, complex integrations, that's given away to what's now the profit enablement center, as I like to call it. Their vision is showing them the way that they must have a best-of-breed total service lifecycle solution covering people and parts. And those integrations, their entire IT ecosystem, inclusive of field service, of course, are increasingly completed using standards and common middleware and even integration as a service in some cases. We're seeing our customers outsource that to people that specialize in that. In short, it gives them that speed to market with the changes that might occur or innovations that need to be introduced rapidly into their service lifecycle ecosphere.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You mentioned manufacturing is perhaps the industry takes the lens there, but this isn't just a manufacturing focused area. I think when you mentioned that infrastructure and implementation, everything is as a service, and it's hitting every industry, isn't it? We're seeing it across. I often think perhaps I recall we touched on this, some of the leading learnings around this concept of as a service came from the software world, where there were some painful mistakes made and some quite big evolutions made. I think manufacturing, especially with the servitization movement and the trend towards servitization, is there, but we're also seeing it in utilities, telcos, fast-moving retail. We're seeing it everywhere, aren't we? Yeah, it's something that's really kind of driving forward. I mean, something that I've talked about at Field Service News and many of our regular columnists that kind of touch on as well is how technology, processes, these two are becoming increasingly entwined. The processes are led by the technology is driving the processes. It's very much a kind of a cohesive unit there. But is the technology driving these changes that we're talking about, these shifts, the approaches that are differing? Or is it the other way around in terms that the shift in thinking is driving a need for innovation? It's something that I kind of never quite get my head around. Is IoT, for example, crucial and that's driving our move to servitization? Or has servitization created a need for us to embrace IoT? Which way round is that? Or is it horses for courses sometimes?
Yeah, it's the classic chicken of the egg.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So I guess I'll stay on the fence. I think it's the intersection of the tech and the thinking. With tech, I think it's a slightly bigger driver, in my opinion. I'll go back to making a historical example. Just as the invention of the printing press in the 15th century by Gutenberg enabled the masses to read and learn, it resulted in an unprecedented evolution in thinking, or a revolution in thinking. And that led directly to such pivotal periods in human history. The Renaissance, the manufacturing revolution. Again, I'm sort of fixated on manufacturing today for some reason. But so has the current pace of technology innovation spawned this next Gutenberg moment. And we remain in the midst of it. And it's really opened up enlightened thinking by field service providers to innovate in order to differentiate. So innovate to differentiate. And that aggressive push to innovate in field service drives even more demand for fit-for-purpose innovations to be brought rapidly to market by solution providers like Astea and so on. And that intersection of tech supply and thinking demand, it just becomes more and more tightly entwined. It's almost like, imagine you've got a cylinder hanging at the bottom of a rope and you just twist and twist and twist and twist and let it unwind. It spins really quickly. So I don't think you can avoid that intersection.
I think it's almost, to continue your metaphor as well, it's almost that these push and pull forces are working in tandem. The innovation, the differentiation, the technology. It's like we'll have one push, and of course the yin and the yang effect. If you push on one side, you're pulling on the other, and then as they come full circle, there's that constant drive, and that's what's building the momentum, I guess.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess it's in a lot of ways it's simple supply and demand, right? Yeah. Nothing revolutionary we're talking about, but I think it's a really interesting thing to think about, right? Which came first?
Yeah. But I suppose that is perhaps the deeper intellectual point over there. Let's park that and let's get into some of the more practicalities for a moment. KPIs, obviously, key performance indicators, are the fulcrum, the driving embodiment of what makes best-in-class companies best-in-class. Every time we see research, whether it be from Gartner, Aberdeen, ourselves, and we look at best-in-class organizations, we always go back to what are those key KPIs that are the best in breed? What are they doing? And it's an area that I think, from my perspective, I think it's an area that a lot of field service organizations really need to be reevaluating what those KPIs, their core KPIs are. as we kind of move into this new world of connectivity, this connected field service world. I mean, performance is now being measured increasingly in different ways, in new ways. As I mentioned, we've moved into this new paradigm of service-centric approaches. So from your perspective and the feedback that you get from your clients and speaking to the market at large, how should we be measuring success of field service organisations today? I mean, to put it in a nutshell, John, what are the new key performance indicators?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. So in the last few months, there's been a noticeable uptick in interest in and adoption of Astea's embedded BI suite. So I've had the good fortune to spend quality time with an Astea team member named Leroy Marcus. He's our head of business intelligence. He's got a master's degree in data science, and he specializes in big data analysis.
Pretty good guy to have on the team.
Yeah. Fantastic. I got to admit, I leave most of our conversations with my head spinning, but they're super impactful discussions, and I just learn a lot from interacting with great folks like him. So these aren't his words, but I've learned a lot from that guy, and I'm sure we'll continue to. But so just like constructing a house, we've got to start with the foundation of KPIs for a field services organization. So that foundation of a house is simple looking but strong. And so is that basis for KPIs. So just really simply put, we must seek to understand whether service capabilities are designed and rendered in a way that provides a positive experience for the consumers, and those capabilities can be measured by X. X, right? But really simply put, that's the foundation for how you determine what those are. If it's a high quality and differentiated experience, it's a positive service experience, right? High quality differentiated equals positive service experience. So what that means will be unique to each service organization, depending upon the verticals they serve, whether they're a B2B or a B2C, so business to business or business to consumer centric business, and then too many other variables to cover in our chat today. So there's no one size fits all approach, but broadly speaking, we're seeing more and more of these new KPIs focus on things like the Net Promoter Score. Much more traditionally adopted by retailers, hospitality, service providers, customer retention, and in some cases, customer engagement with the services brand, measuring those things. Customer spend per visit. With the proliferation of IoT, the percentage of jobs done proactively and just in time. Right. Just to name a few, but those are some of the new ones that we're seeing many more service organizations pay closer attention to.
It's interesting because what we're seeing is this shift towards customer-centric KPIs, essentially. And I think that may be indicative of just the importance of service in that boardroom. You know, we've existed in this world where service has become the kind of dirty secret or the dark art that in the past it was never quite understood by the guys that worked on the product-centric side of the business. The guys in the service part of the organization very often struggled to get their voice heard at the exec level. You know, it was something that nobody quite understood except for the guys out of service. And it was also seen as a necessary cost, a necessary evil. And I think this shift in KPIs is probably a reflection of that shift towards service becoming a much, much more important part of the business as a cohesive whole. You know, service has that voice more increasingly at the top table. And service should always be about the customer, really, but it's the fact that now it's driving itself. It's kind of come full. It's kind of taken ownership, and it makes sense to me that customers are in the heart of that. Generally, and I know this is, again, it's one of these questions that perhaps different organisations will find different answers towards. But from your perspective, in terms of advising the clients that you work with, the companies that you work with, the organisations there, is there a set amount of KPIs or a rough idea? Can there be too many? Can we monitor too much? In a world where there's data everywhere, can we be monitoring too much? I mean, how many KPIs should a field service company be focusing on? And how should they identify the areas that are most pressing for them?
So that answer is dependent upon a lot of variables, some of which we just talked about in our last example. But it depends on a lot of variables such as complexity of their service model, the market sector they operate within. Those are unique to each company, dependent upon their overarching strategy or that foundation we talked about. Just some examples. So do they handle parts logistics, or are they a third-party service only provider that's dependent upon the original manufacturer to deliver those parts and handle the logistics? Are they more long cycle projects driven or short cycle service call oriented? Right. So there is no one size fits all, but in our general experience, we see anywhere between 4 to 10 measures or key performance indicators are likely to be the best key in most types of service delivery company. Right. So as a doctor would only prescribe a medication or a treatment following an evaluation of the patient.
Yes.
So should a services organization choose their KPIs or their key business health indicators.
Okay. Yep.
Following an assessment of their business from the top down, from the bottom up, and from the middle outwards to partners, the contingent workforce, and so on. And that's got to be revisited and refined periodically as the business and the industry changes over time. Now, those refinements, typically minor course corrections, not 180-degree turns so that your customer base and your employee base don't know which direction you're going. It's got to anchor back to what is hoped is a clear vision and core values set by the service organization. So to boil it down super simply, companies in the field services business employ technicians who install and deinstall machines and do preventative maintenance or unscheduled repairs and upgrades. One sentence, that's what we do, right? That's what the services organizations that we serve do. And to optimize the value of those tasks, it's essential that organization achieves max efficiency in all related processes, upstream and downstream, just like the dispatch of technicians, tracking of inventory, completion of orders, especially the first time visit. So to give some examples, I think typical KPIs would maybe fall into 4 key categories and then 7 specific KPIs, just to give an example in that 4 to 7 range. So task completion, productivity, inventory, and CSAT, customer satisfaction, right? So the 7 in those categories would be, again, not a one size fits all, but to give some examples, first time fix is an incredibly important KPI. SLA compliance, mean time to resolution, right? So that's around task completion. Productivity, technician utilization, and travel time. Inventory, average parts usage, slow moving inventory, and then CSAT, what is their Net Promoter Score? Remember that Net Promoter Score question, for those that aren't familiar with it, is called the ultimate question, is would you recommend my services brand to a business colleague or friend? And there's a score scale. So there's just some specific examples of some that we see being pretty common across most businesses.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because there's every industry. I mean, obviously the field service world is an interesting one because it sits across so many verticals. And then within each vertical, every organization has its own DNA. Yeah, we do see these certain trends across all industries. And I think you've touched on a lot of them there in terms of what we should be monitoring. I touched on the amount of data that we have today. It's something that I talk about a fair bit. And modern data analytics, of course, the flip side of so much data is it's so fast. I mean, one of the V's of big data, isn't it? Velocity. And I mean, we're in a world of real-time monitoring of KPIs now. It's very much the norm in many, many cases. It's the old cliche, isn't it? Paralysis by analysis, though. How do we avoid that? How often should we be utilizing data, tracking our KPIs to ensure that we're delivering the field service as efficiently as possible? And just a little addendum to that is, I guess, would that be in layers? So the field service manager is perhaps wanting to see his team performance almost in real time, but perhaps at the director level, it should be slowed down a bit. Or what's your thoughts on that kind of whole kind of question around how often should we be monitoring that?
Yeah, I like the analysis paralysis is a common theme in so many businesses, especially nowadays. So with a larger volume of data being collected, and it's unprecedented now, especially with the Internet of Things, data analysts can't keep up the pace. And in some cases, it's actually impossible. I say increasingly so, it's impossible to keep up the pace. But when it comes to machine learning, the data plays a really important role here, of course. So in the case of not being able to keep pace, data analysts that can rely on machine learning algorithms to do the job.
Yeah.
It probes deeper into the data to reveal anomalies that in some cases, or even many cases, they just can't be found manually. It's impossible, right? No human being is capable of that. So machine learning can be useful also for real-time KPIs, not just trends, but real-time KPIs. Let me give you an example that might not jump off the page at people, right? So think about it in terms of processing data that's useful at a very specific point in time, but becomes irrelevant if it's not processed fast enough.
Okay.
Let's call these perishable insights. Okay. So a real-life example, in a customer contact center, machine learning is evaluating each call and potential service order in real time as it's being recorded, perhaps by voice, but that call is being recorded within a field service system, such as like Astea provides. Then and there, possible issues can be flagged, and the system can quickly determine the course of action based on the patterns in the conversation. Once the call ends, opportunity gone. Yeah. So in real time, that algorithm is analyzing what's happening that can give that dispatcher or that scheduler, that person on the other end of the phone in the contact center, or the other end of the computer, if it's been a call logged over the web, is able to take advantage of that in real time. And as perishable insights, it's a really interesting thing to think about, right? So that then enables, if they are able to react to it, it enables a course correction that would result or could result in a more optimized diagnosis, a prescription for the resolution, and the dispatch job assignment. Yeah. Once it's gone, you've lost that opportunity. You potentially dispatch the service order to the wrong tech, dispatch the wrong part, and so on. Many several underlying examples.
And it's that corrective ability that can save, like you say, so many misdiagnoses of the issue. But like many things in field service, it's a case that there's huge amounts of benefits of scale, of course, as well, because every single option on there, it grows and grows and grows. Like scheduling, like all of these things that we've talked about, there's this ability in field service to make very small wins hugely significant. A 6 minute per engineer time saving can equate to millions for many organizations. It's that kind of iterative growth there, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And to expand on the question further, because I gave you that real time example. But so I think my general take is the frequency of monitoring is that there are outlier exceptions to what I think of as everyday KPIs, such as SLA compliance on a top 5 value customer, jobs per day part in the top 3 region, etc. The system should notify key personnel that can affect change nearly immediately or in as real time as possible. And in that last example, real time is the only option. Otherwise, the opportunity is lost. But regarding the more overarching KPIs, closely linked to a company's strategy and type of services business, they should be monitored daily at a certain level, perhaps by that contact center manager, weekly at a deeper level, maybe that regional service manager, and then monthly at a deeper still level to uncover either positive or negative trends that can be actioned by enabling more of the positive and less of the negative. Nothing revolutionary there, right? But and I think visibility into those trends based on a combination of history, current state or real-time state, and those future predictions, they enable the captain and the crew of the service ship to make even minor course corrections in time to avoid the storms. Seek sunny skies and arrive at the destination on time with a happy customer and the crew, so that the customer ambassadors who are more engaged because they delivered a positive experience.
Makes a lot of sense, actually. And it kind of echoes what we're talking about right at the top about the processes being driven by the technology then being driven by the processes, and this kind of ongoing drive between the two to kind of refine, course correct on smaller increments. You mentioned the crew, John. That's a beautiful segue for us to move into the next generation of crew, the next generation workforces. Sometimes I struggle when writing about what are the biggest changes in a conversation around the changing world of field service. It's a challenge because our world's evolving so rapidly, whether it be the technology, whether it be the business strategies, but of course the workforce is fundamental to field service. Field service is all about the people. Gone are the days of hiring techs who would stay with a company for decades and become experts at their jobs and have that ingrained tribal knowledge. And today, service leaders need to embrace contingent and third-party workers if they want to succeed. But the question is, how do they adapt to this new reality? How do they make that change?
Yeah, I think I'm big on foundations today too. So I think it starts at the very foundation of a services organization. It's people, just as you said. As great as any technology is in the services industry, the people are really it.
Yeah.
Right? You can't run a field service organization just with a system. Right. So I think it's founded in recruitment of top talent, development of top talent, and retention of top talent. Recruit, develop, retain.
Yeah.
Rinse and repeat. Surprisingly, this capability is not every HR leader or services leader fortes. Right? It's not.
Yeah.
In the last couple of years, we're seeing more and more CPOs, not chief product officers, but chief people officers.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So organizations, just to name a few, so Viacom, Lyft, Tesla, they've appointed those chief people officers, CPOs, in the last couple of years. And what does that mean? So it's a highly influential leader at the top of the organization in the C-suite. They are team builders, strategists, culture creators, nurturers, number crunchers who are doing their own data analysis on the people, the trends they're seeing in the people process, all to create a differentiated employee experience that bleeds into how your customers perceive what you hope is your service differentiation. Your people.
Yeah.
And again, whether they're the service ambassadors, the feet on the street or the feet in the factory, or the person in the contact center with whom they're interacting with. Right. So whether recruiting, developing, and retaining their own direct workforce or the contingent workers, I think most of the same principles apply. Robust and intuitive programs and tools available at each stage of the people part of the services process are vital. The underlying artificial intelligence to make it easy for people to schedule and be scheduled. Some other examples, mobile warehouse solutions to enable order, pick, pack, part, and ship a part. The mobile field service technician solution to receive the same service order, receive parts, put them into service, decommission a part or a machine, and return it for safe disposal using reverse logistics capabilities. Every step of the full service life cycle needs to be intuitive and easy on the surface and working like crazy under the surface based on world-class innovation and tech. Just like a duck gliding across the water.
Yes.
That pond looks like glass. It's tranquility and peace on the water surface, and that duck is paddling like crazy.
Yeah.
So under the water is that workhorse of a full service life cycle platform. So that's what you want your people, ducks, and underneath them is that service life cycle management solution, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite metaphors. I spent some time as regular readers and listeners to the podcast and these videos will know I spent some time in hospitality originally. And one of the mantras that was embedded into us, we called it swan theory. Same principle, ducks and swans. Swans are just big ducks with long necks. But the idea was the swan is one of the most graceful birds that are just moving around. And that's what you want the outward perception to be. But you know that swan's legs are going like Billy-O underneath that water because there's an awful lot of work to get it done. And it's a very, very good metaphor. It really kind of resonates with me.
I'm sure most British people would think swan and most Americans would think duck. Yeah.
And the Canadians would go with geese.
That's right.
So we've said quite a lot in the past. It's been almost unavoidable if you go to any conference, not just within field service, but any industry, about the shift between boomer workforce, the baby boomers who are retiring, and the millennial workforce that's been the ink. I feel like saying the incoming millennial workforce is now a bit dated because they're here in many instances. But that shift is still moving to a degree. Is there a pressing need for field service companies to be shifting our processes, training and recruitment to meet this change? Or are is there a bit of hyperbole around this? And is good still good? And should we just still focus on the values that we hold dear? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe just a choice of words, but I think rather than shift, to me, it's more of an evolution or evolving the recruitment, development, and retention. And by the way, don't forget about the middle child, Gen X.
Yeah, sat right here.
Yeah, likewise. You look much more like a millennial, Kris, in person. But look, as our world evolves in most places to become more culturally homogenous, so must that include the adjustment for the generational differences, right? So the invaluable boomers who hold tons of services, tribal knowledge in their heads, the organization needs to keep them engaged and enable knowledge transference in a safe way, meaning in a safe way for that particular individual to feel valued and not at risk because they've transferred that tribal knowledge. That transference can be done in the classroom, in the van, and most recently virtually, right? So imagine a scenario where you got a wet behind the ears young tech who's been formally trained in a certain discipline and quote unquote certified. Put them in the real world where they're performing preventative maintenance inspection on a factory floor. They're called upon with their mobile device to perform an emergency repair on a mission critical piece of equipment elsewhere in that same factory. The services org, they got a 1 hour resolution SLA on that piece of equipment. The nearest qualified tech with a lot more experience, the boomer, he or she is 2 hours away. So that young Jedi in training has got all the skills according to their certification, but something unexpected occurs during the call. They lack that one unattainable thing. And that, to help them do what that unexpected. And what is that one unattainable thing? 40 years of experience the boomer's got. It might be 2 hours away, right? So thanks to augmented reality integrated with a mobile service solution, that wet behind the ears tech can get in touch with their boomer Yoda. Who can be on their shoulder virtually to guide them using real-time visual connection to understand what that unexpected might be to the less experienced, but it's routine to the Yoda. And they get that mission critical piece of equipment back up and running on time through a combination. That's just a real life example of how a knowledge transference can go then and there. Right?
And there are so many layers to that as well, John. There's so many layers because obviously the first and primary function of the service call is always to make sure the customer is happy and that things are moving around. But I'm just thinking from the areas you touched on there is how you keep that. I like the way you phrase it, the safe transference of knowledge. It adds value to that experienced tech. He sees his role in the industry, in the organization rather, being reinforced. He's given that value as an experienced, senior, respected member of the team. But it also adds a layer of confidence to that younger tech, which, as I kind of touched on a wee bit earlier, these days of being a company man, perhaps it's not something that exists anywhere near as it used to back in the day. And people, I think there's a stat, millennials are more likely to move something like 4 or 5 times in career, not in organizations. So the retention of service techs is hugely important to keep these guys engaged and giving them that trust, that confidence. I think that plays a really big role in that. And I'm always a fan of a Star Wars reference as well.
Thank goodness you're not a Star Trek fan.
Yeah, exactly.
Or maybe you are, but anyway.
Well, you can be both. It's the 21st century. We can accept both.
That's right.
Though it's a great example there of the technology, and I've been a big proponent of exactly that scenario, why augmented reality has to play a big role in field service for quite some time. And there are a number of areas that technology can play this role in helping mitigate the potential pitfalls that can arise when we're shifting our thinking around these next generation workforces. Another example which I'd like to kind of get your thoughts on is how technology can help a field service organisation rather, maintain a consistent service offering. Because consistency is quite often consistently good service is what gives you customer engagement, customer sat, and customer longevity. Not being excellent once and being terrible the next 2 times, or being excellent 3 times and terrible once. You don't want excellent all the way, you want good, really. That's what we buy into. Sure. That's obviously a challenge when we talk about third-party workforces, contingent workforces, a gig economy. What role can technology play in kind of helping maintain that consistency across the service offering?
Yeah, so I think real-time access to the same accurate information that every person in that service chain needs is essential, whether that's a full-time employee or this third-party contingent worker. So I liken it to a symphony orchestra.
Okay.
I'm not sure if you know it or not, but symphony orchestras average between 70 to over 100 musicians. Okay. Every musician is playing the same song to precisely the same beat or cadence. But they've got their particular parts that are only relevant to their instrument. Yeah. And even within an instrumental section, each individual person may be playing a different part. And they're led by the conductor. So take just one of those musicians and bring them into the piece 1 beat late, or speed up or slow down their beat during the performance, the whole thing goes off the rail.
Yeah.
Worse still, imagine a percussionist, a drummer, who's playing an entirely different piece.
Yeah.
It would be a disaster, right? Or maybe it would be cool, depending upon your musical taste.
But if you like the avant-garde, right. But let's stick with the traditional.
Right. So in this analogy, the conductor, that's the field service management system. Using artificial intelligence for that silent instruction and guidance to all the members of that orchestra, the full-time employee, the contingent worker. Guidance to all the members of the service chain to play their part at the right time. From the incoming call, to the dispatch schedule of the people, to the parts order, pick, pack, ship, to only communicating the appropriate information to the team member, depending on their security clearance.
Yeah.
To the end, the synchronous arrival of the tech and the part to the right place at the right time to do a great job at the optimal cost.
Yeah, it's allowing that continuity across each part. You're absolutely right. I like the example of the symphony, because everyone is reliant upon each other. One piece goes, the whole piece as well. And it makes a lot of sense. A final point on the generational changes around workforces, and to stay on the technology. Is it playing a role in terms of attracting, engaging, and retaining the new talent? As you mentioned, we want to attract, engage, retain, especially now that this workforce coming in, including ourselves in Generation X. I'm certainly much more comfortable with being Google native. I wouldn't quite say I was Google native. I'm a 1980s guy, so I'm kind of just ahead of just before that, but not a million miles away. We're all very comfortable with the world of the internet, and this generation that's now coming in, does having the technology there that does all of these things that we're talking about, does that have its part to play in how we attract these new workers? Because one final point on that, sorry, these new workers, they've become a real currency, because good staff in a technological world now, it is the differentiators go back. So we want to retain the best. Does tech play a role in doing that?
Absolutely. And by the way, I'm an Atari native generation, excellent, so I got a little bit of time on you.
We'll be back to Pongs before
right. I mean, I think for the Google native generation, innovative, easy to use tech is and will be table stakes in the field service world. So we come across in the prospects that we work with, we come across some Windows mobile deployments still in use. So field service technicians interacting with headquarters with the Windows mobile device. I can assure you that one of the first questions that's going to arise from a Google Google native generation hire, what's your plan to upgrade those mobile devices? They just automatically know it's obsolete. It could be frightening to them. There's got to be a light at the end of the tunnel for that Google native generation for them to agree to take a job when that device is their lifeline to receipt, execution, and completion of the job, and nearly all essential functions they associate with that job. They've got to have confidence that the technology that service organization is using is current and future-proof. And without it, they will move on to another service organization that's there already.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And again, it's that confidence, isn't it, that we touched on.
Yeah.
That brings us quite neatly to the final part of today's conversation. And perhaps, like I mentioned, it's hard to identify which are the biggest changes, which are the most impactful. If somebody was to put a gun to my head today, I would say this next topic is perhaps the most important, perhaps the biggest shift that we've seen in field service. There is a change in skill set requirement of the field service engineer. So let's begin with, what does the modern field service engineer look like in terms of the key attributes that field service companies are seeking in those new hires?
Yeah, I mean, there's some key characteristics I think of embracing a change, right? Patient with leading edge and bleeding edge technology, if rapidly deployed in a pilot situation, that as long as they can be assured they can revert to the pre-innovation test that can be enabled quickly and easily. They're less loyal to the company and more loyal to the type and locale of work. However, when they're loyal to a company, they will be fiercely so, and it will be because of resources at the top, like those chief people officers that I mentioned, driving those recruitment of the right type of person, the development and the retention of that person. That'll be key. And just more productive and more adaptable with shortened learning curves due to the increasingly intuitive and sophisticated solutions at their fingertips and on their heads. When you think about the evolution of wearables, it's now becoming mainstream and affordable and those types of things. I think just to name a few, I could go on and on and on, but I think those are four key characteristics that occur to me.
Okay. Something that I've been caught in two minds about for a while now around this topic. And I've heard arguments on both sides of this, so I'm going to just throw it up there and see if you have the wisdom that can help me kind of fall on either side, or whether it's, again, something that there is benefits in both approaches. But in some sense, I can see how technology, in particular augmented knowledge systems, we kind of touched on today, I can see how that would drive us down a path where we require our engineers to have a very broad but fairly shallow knowledge base, where an engineer is set out to cover a broad range of devices, and because they've got that supplemented knowledge, that they're able to dial in and get that experience elsewhere. Alternatively, I can also see how technology, in particular artificial intelligence, machine learning, could lead us to a place where we get much, much better triage. Again, touching on the example you gave earlier, that diagnosis being much, much more efficient. Remote maintenance, remote assistance solutions, being able to provide a solution where if the engineer is sent out, generally it's going to fall outside of the Pareto principle. 80% of the solutions we can fix. So it's that 20% where that engineer has to be the expert. Your brand is reliant on this guy going in and fixing it. It's a fix that can't be done via the algorithms. It's a fix that can't be identified. So in that instance, he would need a very, very deep level of knowledge, very refined. I can't work out which one of those two is the future. What's your thoughts on that?
I think there's a place for both. So much like management by exception enables any of us to focus on key parts of our jobs more, so do similar tools and technologies such as artificial intelligence, augmented reality, enable specialists to become even more specialized and invaluable to their organizations. And that typically results in a higher employee engagement and effectiveness, as they can choose to focus more and more on what they enjoy. Right? So the smart and those that desire to be specialized get smarter and more specialized. But on the flip side, I think there's another end of the spectrum that doesn't wish to specialize. Their job to them is a paycheck and not much more. That's the reality. But they too can be productive based on that shallow, broad knowledge base example that you just made. They'll typically be less loyal to the company and vice versa. You're less valuable to the company, so I might care less about retaining that person. But they're going to have a role driven by a requirement for human intervention, which we've agreed is always going to be a necessity.
Yeah.
But they've got much less brain intervention, creativity, problem-solving skills. And as self-service becomes more and more prevalent in service systems, so will end customers be completing more and more of those jobs, plug-and-play jobs on their own, with no third-party human intervention. We talked in our last about my mom.
Yes.
In the mid-70s, who's doing her own service of her treadmill in her home, right? So I think that level of tech that is just a paycheck. They'll have job opportunities, but I think they'll be less likely to be in demand as a result of that.
Yeah, and it's also perhaps as you explain that, I think, and this is me maybe perhaps putting my fortune teller's hat on, but perhaps that's where we'll see the shift and the change in terms of the contingent workforce, in terms of the gig economy, and in terms of those that then embrace a career and those that want to, and is perhaps we'll start to see the broader, shallower knowledge. That is the stuff that you put to the third party or the gig economy, and then the internal guys. Like you say, there isn't much more value to that refined knowledge. One final question to wrap up today, John. Just how critical is it that service leaders can adapt to this brave new world? We've gone through some real kind of key areas of change. I think most of us within the industry can acknowledge and understand that the industry is changing rapidly. It's changed hugely since we launched Field Service News, which was only half a decade ago. How important is it that these field service organisations understand the magnitude of these changes, and can service organisations that don't adapt still remain relevant?
Yeah, it's mission critical. So service organizations that don't adapt or have near to midterm plans to adapt, they'll become increasingly irrelevant, decreasingly profitable, and much less attractive to work for from a field service engineer standpoint. This is particularly true if the service provider's model is heavily dependent on the contingent workforce.
Yeah.
Those service providers with the most innovative and intuitive tech that enables as seamless an experience as possible to assess, accept, and complete and get paid for a job wins out every time over those that can't or have a big hole in that situation, to use that contingent worker example. So relevancy, profitability, with less engaged, less loyal employees is a huge price to pay by not adapting to, or at least having a near-term plan to adapt to this brave new world we're seeing.
Okay, well, thank you ever so much for that, John. I think that's left us with some really interesting thinking points. It's a hugely changing world, as we mentioned in the top. Obviously, some big challenges for companies that need to get their head around these changes, but I think the most important thing is wherever there are changes, wherever there are challenges, there are, of course, huge opportunities. And as we move into this brave new world, it's a brave new world of opportunity as well. That brings me to the end, and it's just to say thank you very much for joining me for the conversation. George, it's been great to have you on board. For those that are listening in and want to check out the more information about the products and service offerings from Astea, John, remind me if I've got this right. It's www.astea.com for the website, and we're looking at Astea Service, I believe, on the Twitter.
That's absolutely correct, Chris.
Okay.
And thanks for coming to visit me today. It's always a pleasure to see you.
Absolutely,
and we have
likewise.
the good fortune. We'll see each other twice in April.
Twice
April 3rd
in 1 month.
And end of April in Palm Springs.
Yes, and the third is Warwick, UK,
Yep.
Palm Springs, for those of you in California, where both John and I will both be speaking and taking part in the conferences, relevant conferences there. But for now, thanks again. We shall see you in a couple of weeks' time, and we'll see you again soon, I'm sure. Take care, John.
Bye-bye.